Hello, I'm Bernard Norcott-Mahany. I work at the Blueford branch of the Kansas City Public Library. April is National Poetry Month. For April of 2025, I am reading poems about 3 a day from Edgar Lee Masters' Spoon River Anthology. He was inspired to write this work in part based on going through a graveyard in Lewistown, Illinois, where he was from. But he was also inspired by the Greek anthology, which a friend of his, who was an editor, had given him. The Greek anthology is a collection of elegiac poems. And so he decided he was going to write a collection of poems about the dead of Spoon River. So we imagine ourselves going through the graveyard at Spoon River, and we see a tombstone, and then the person who's buried there then speaks to us. So today I'm going to be reading Mrs. Charles Bliss, Mrs. George Reece, and Reverend Lemuel Wiley. Mrs. Charles Bliss. Reverend Wiley advised me not to divorce him for the sake of the children, and Judge Summers advised him the same. So we stuck to the end of the path. But 2 of the children thought he was right, and 2 of the children thought I was right, and the 2 who sided with him blamed me, and the 2 who sided with me blamed him, and they grieved for the one they sided with, and all were torn with the guilt of judging, all tortured in soul, because they could not admire equally him and me. Now every gardener knows that plants grown in cellars or under stones are twisted and yellow and weak, and no mother would let her baby suck diseased milk from her breast. Yet preachers and judges advise the raising of souls where there is no sunlight, but only twilight, no warmth, but only dampness and cold. Preachers and judges. So here, Mrs. Bliss, despite her name, did not have a blissful marriage, and ideally, the 2 of them should have divorced. It sounds like this is a case of irreconcilable differences. It doesn't look like it's anything stronger than that, but because it wasn't a flourishing marriage, both lived sort of shriveled lives, and all because the preacher said they shouldn't divorce, and the judge said they shouldn't divorce. So public opinion trumped their own feelings. Mrs. George Reece. To this generation, I would say, memorize some bit of verse of truth or beauty. It may serve a turn in your life. My husband had nothing to do with the fall of the bank. He was only cashier. The wreck was due to the president, Thomas Rhodes, and his vain, unscrupulous son. Yet my husband was sent to prison, and I was left with the children to feed and clothe and school them. And I did it, and sent them forth into the world all clean and strong. And all through the wisdom of Pope, the poet. Act well your part. There all the honor lies. So here, a woman who had been married to a cashier at the bank who was sent to prison for embezzlement, even though the problem was with the president of the bank, who was not punished. But what got her through life, and the advice she gives to people, is learn some poetry, which I also would urge people to do, and then that, nuggets of wisdom from the poems can then help you get through life. And for her, it was a line from Alexander Pope. Reverend Lemuel Wiley. I preached 4,000 sermons. I conducted 40 revivals and baptized many converts. Yet no deed of mine shines brighter in the memory of the world, and none is treasured more by me. Look how I saved the Blisses from divorce and kept the children free from that disgrace, to grow up into moral men and women, happy themselves, a credit to the village. So here, Reverend Wiley, he considers the triumph of his life keeping the Blisses from getting a divorce, which in a sense really sort of ruined the lives of those people, even though ostensibly the shame of the divorce was avoided. And then, of course, the kids did not grow up in a split household. But from the sound of it, from Mrs. Bliss's point of view, that was wrong. Whereas Wiley thinks this was his great triumph. I saved that marriage. So that was Mrs. Charles Bliss, Mrs. George Reece, Reverend Lemuel Wiley.